Hey, what's up? I'm Boots Riley.
We can join together and fight.
You know what's hard to pull off? Making a boring movie about Putin. This guy is one of the most theatrically compelling villains of our lifetime. Former KGB rose through the chaos of post-Soviet Russia, got power through manipulation and violence, turned a country into his personal project. It should be impossible to make it dull. And yet they did it. Paul Dano plays a spin doctor inspired by Vladislav Surkov, Putin's real-life shadow advisor. Jude Law plays Putin during his rise in the 90s. It premiered at Venice to a 10-minute standing ovation. Everyone thought they had something. Then the film sat for 6 months with no US distributor. Nobody wanted to touch it. Vertical Entertainment finally picked it up in February 2026 and dumped it into limited release in May. Critics said Jude Law was great, but that's the only thing that works here. Mostly, it's just 136 minutes that feel like a Wikipedia page read out loud. Exposition about Russian political manipulation that never turns into an actual story. Maybe it would have worked as a miniseries. As a movie, it just feels like a boring lecture. They spent over $20 million making it, and it earned just $8 million worldwide. The biggest problem here is that this movie basically softballs Putin. Rather than showing him as the monster he is, it frames him as a strong leader who brought order after chaos. A necessary force. That's exactly the narrative Putin himself would prefer. You set out to make a movie about a villain and somehow ended up telling his version of the story. No wonder nobody showed up. A Star Wars movie just lost to a couple of YouTubers. Backrooms, you might have seen it, it's this creepy found footage concept that started as a short on YouTube, beat a Star Wars theatrical release at the box office. So did another small horror film called Obsession, also made by a YouTuber. 2 indie movies from first-time directors knocked a Disney tentpole down to 3rd place. A few weeks before this happened, nobody in Hollywood thought that was possible. The Mandalorian and Grogu was supposed to be the safest bet Disney had. Baby Yoda merch everywhere. Jon Favreau directing with no drama, no reshoots, no fired directors, just a clean 92-day shoot that came in on budget. After 7 years without a Star Wars movie in theaters, this was the big return. It opened to $81.7 million. If you adjust for inflation, that's actually below Solo. And Solo was considered the biggest disaster in franchise history until now. But the opening wasn't the problem. The second weekend was the problem. The film dropped 70%, which is the worst collapse any Star Wars movie has ever had. A movie like this needs around $500 million worldwide to break even once you factor in marketing spend, which was probably another $100 million at least. Right now, it's sitting at about $250 million. And the international numbers that usually bail these things out just aren't there. Only 44% of the gross is coming from overseas, when it should be way higher. The problem was that Disney looked at a TV show that had already lost most of its audience and decided to turn it into a $165 million movie anyway. I completely forgot this movie came out, and apparently, so did everyone else. So Guy Ritchie made a heist movie with Henry Cavill and Jake Gyllenhaal about extracting $1 billion from a dictator who's hiding out on his private island. Sounds like the kind of thing Ritchie used to do really well. They shot it back in summer 2023, wrapped in October. And then the movie just didn't come out. Lionsgate bought the US rights and announced a January 2025 release. Then November 2024 rolls around and they pull it. The official reason was that the film wasn't ready, but the cameras had stopped rolling over a year earlier. How is it still not ready? Turns out Ritchie had been directing at an insane pace. 8 films and 3 TV shows since 2020. The Gentleman for Netflix, Mobland for Paramount Plus, Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The guy was juggling so many projects that he apparently couldn't finish this one. The film needed reshoots that never happened because Ritchie was always somewhere else making something else. By November 2025, Lionsgate gave up entirely, just walked away from the distribution rights. The production company that financed the thing, Black Bear, was stuck holding a movie that was technically never finished. They'd started a small distribution arm the year before, and now they had to use it because nobody else wanted this film. They released it on May 15th, nearly 3 years after it was shot. Opening weekend was just $3 million across 2,000 screens, 9th place. The Top Gun re-release made more money. Second weekend it dropped 70% and didn't even hit $1 million. 3 weeks later you could rent it at home. Critics called it a lazy, generic action movie running on autopilot. I feel like Richie, like Tarantino and some of the other guys from the 90s, is mostly irrelevant now. Everything he touches turns into forgettable streaming content. In the Gray is just the latest example. Great cast, completely wasted. 8 years. That's how long Boots Riley disappeared after Sorry to Bother You. And when he finally came back, Neon decided to bet big on him. $20 million, the most expensive film they've ever made. It's about a crew of Bay Area shoplifters who steal designer merchandise and resell it cheap, and eventually they team up with a Chinese factory worker to take down a fashion CEO played by Demi Moore. It's exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from Riley if you know anything about him. Neon's boss Tom Quinn was out there in March talking about how this was going to play throughout the whole year, not just the summer window. They premiered it at South by Southwest and everything looked good. Except someone on X asked Riley why they went with South by Southwest instead of Cannes, and Riley just said it. They rejected the film. So already things aren't going according to plan. They get 1,750 screens, which wasn't the number they wanted. Opening weekend comes and it does 3.7 million. By Wednesday, the daily numbers have dropped 50%. Neon's head of distribution is on the phone all day with theater owners, begging them not to pull the screens. Meanwhile, Riley's on X posting about how actually the percentage drop was the smallest of any movie that weekend, trying to argue that word of mouth is building. It wasn't building. The Mandalorian and Grogu came out the same day. Obsession and Backrooms were dominating. Nobody was showing up. Total ended up around $7 million on a $20 million budget. Neon's most expensive production ever is returning about 35 cents on the dollar. Riley will probably vanish for another 8 years and come back with something else that critics loves and nobody watches. That's just how it goes for him. Andy Serkis first attached himself to this project back in 2011. It was supposed to shoot in 2014. It didn't happen. Netflix bought the rights in 2018, took a look at what they had and dropped it. That should have been a sign. But Angel Studios picked it up. If you don't know them, they're the company behind Sound of Freedom. They've built their whole business on faith-based films and conservative grassroots marketing. And Animal Farm made sense for them, right? It's literally an anti-communist allegory. Their audience should love this. Except they rewrote the screenplay. The satire isn't really about communism anymore, it's about capitalism and consumerism. The opening doesn't even have the animals revolting against a tyrant. It has Farmer Jones losing the farm to bank repossession. The humans around the farm are corporate villains now, and they added fart jokes because they wanted to make Orwell kid-friendly. Critics gave it a 24% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences gave it a C- cinema score, which is one of the worst grades of the year. It opened to 3.4 million, crashed 84% in its second weekend to just over 500,000, and died immediately. 5.7 million total on a $35 million budget. 15 years Serkis spent on this, and the final product managed to unite the entire political spectrum against it. Conservatives were furious about the anti-capitalist angle. Liberals found the Angel Studios connection toxic. Families walked in expecting a cute cartoon about talking animals and sat through 96 minutes of income inequality lectures, pissing off literally everyone simultaneously. That actually takes talent. So apparently Gene Simmons from Kiss is a movie producer now. He started this company called Hamilton Productions, and their plan is to make 25 films over 5 years. sort of fun action movies. This was their first. For the director, they hired Rennie Harlin. If that name rings a bell, it's because he made Cutthroat Island, which for a long time was literally the biggest box office bomb in movie history. The movie itself is a shark thriller. Plane crashes in the Pacific, survivors discover the shark showed up before the rescue boats. Aaron Eckhart plays the heroic co-pilot. It looks and feels like something that was supposed to go straight to streaming, but somehow escaped into actual theaters. IndieWire called it brain dead but heartfelt, although Simmons himself was more generous about it. His exact words were, "That's as much fun as I can imagine with my pants on." It cost $40 million and made just about $5 million. The distributor was Magenta Light Studios, which is a 3-year-old startup most people have never heard of. Their previous best opening was $1 million. So Deepwater nearly doubling that to $2 million was actually a win for them. When Hamilton sold the distribution to them, everyone involved knew this wasn't going to be a blockbuster. This was basically what a small startup could scrape together. There's a natural limit to what something like this can do with almost no ad spend. Video on demand is where this one makes its actual money. Mortal Kombat II was finished in September 2025, done and ready to go. The producer went on record saying the movie didn't need any more work. It was just sitting there waiting to be released. The original date was October 24th, 2025, which had way less competition than The Summer Corridor. Warner Brothers looked at that and decided, nah, this movie deserves better. They pushed it 7 months to May 2026 because they wanted a summer blockbuster slot. The director called the delay them being a victim of their own success. Deadline ran sources saying the move to summer would generate tons more traction than October ever could. Everyone was very confident. And then May 2026 arrived and it opened to 63 million worldwide against an 80 million projection. Domestically, it hit 40 million, which was the floor of what they'd hoped for. International was weak. A week later, The Mandalorian and Grogu came out and completely buried it. The movie's sitting at around 127 million now on an 80 million budget, and that's before marketing. They've already scheduled the digital release for June 9th, so the theatrical run is basically over. In October, this movie would have had a much easier path. In May, it got crushed by Michael and Devil Wears Prada 2, and then immediately overshadowed by Star Wars. Here's a movie where everything worked except the one thing that actually matters. It's about a shepherd who reads murder mysteries out loud to his sheep every night, not realizing they understand every word. When the shepherd turns up dead, the sheep solve the crime. Hugh Jackman plays the shepherd. Critics gave it a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences gave it 96%. It's one of the best reviewed films of Jackman's career, and it's on track to lose over $50 million. The budget was $75 million, which means they needed about $188 million to break even. After 4 weeks, it's made around $103 million worldwide, and it's running out of steam. That gap is not closable. The problem wasn't the movie is great. The problem is that Amazon spent $75 million on a CGI animal hybrid family film, and it's a genre that has been struggling for years, and then they released it into May, which was already a massacre. Devil Wears Prada the week before, Michael dominating, Mortal Kombat fighting for scraps, Mandalorian and Grogu right behind. A family comedy about detective sheep needed breathing room and got a demolition derby instead. Amazon doesn't really sweat theatrical losses because they'll make it work on streaming. But as a theatrical release, this is a film that did everything right and still couldn't survive. Sony saw some solid potential here. Nate Bargatze is the highest-grossing stand-up comedian in the world right now. He's a Grammy winner, hosted SNL twice, hosted the Emmys. And his whole brand is aggressively clean. It's basically PG-level comedy. Sony looked at that and thought, there's an audience here that Hollywood has completely ignored. Live-action family comedy for people who like clean humor. Nate already has a massive touring fan base who pay money to see him. Put him in a movie and those people will show up. That logic was correct. What Sony did next was not. The movie is a pretty simple premise. Nate plays a car salesman whose wife goes on Shark Tank, lands a deal, and leaves town to build her business. He's left as a stay-at-home dad for the first time. It's basically Mr. Mom from 1983, which the critics were happy to point out. The original release date was March 13th, and March 13th was empty. Almost nothing else coming out. The fan base alone would have been enough to give this movie a decent run in that window. Sony moved it to May 29th. May 29th had Backrooms, Obsession, Passenger, and all the holdover family movies that were still playing. Pre-release tracking started at 18 to 23 million and collapsed to single digits by release week. The movie opened to 9.2 million worldwide, finished 5th place, and got a 23% on Rotten Tomatoes. Budget was 25 million. Break-even is around 62 million. At 9 million and falling, that's not happening. And they can't count on international because nobody outside the United States has any idea who Nate Bargatze is. Sony had the right strategy and scheduled this movie to death.